Good day, Prof. Mel and classmates. I will be sharing with you the P process and other models for advocacy. We will be discussing the objectives, overview of P process, and with particular focus on the use case in advocacy and social mobilization, and also discuss relationship of P process to other advocacy models, as well as the discussion points. One objective is to recap the P process model, which one of my groupmate has shared already, relate and learn some examples of P process and advocacy works in biodiversity conservation. We will also compare and determine common components with other models such as C model, COMBI or communication for behavioral impact, and Cube model, which were discussed by my groupmates as well. And then we will end with a possible discussion points for our respective advocacy work. Just a recap on P process, it has 5 steps, but broadly, it's composed of theory, participation, and capacity. So theory in a way that there will be on step one analysis, there will be participation all across strategic design, development, and testing, and also in the capacity strengthening, we have step four, which is focused on the implementation and monitoring. And then the last one is evaluation and replanning. It is a tool for strategic planning and normally evidence based, health centered social science behavior change communication grounded on theory. It has also measurable impact. And as I've mentioned, it was initially utilized in the health sector, but also been used successfully in biodiversity conservation, which we'll be discussing in detail in the next slides. So in the biodiversity conservation, the goal of this communication is to change the behavior through increased support of stakeholders and decision makers for the management as well as conservation of protected areas. In step one of P process, we have inquire. So in terms of this step, the audience analysis was done. For example, the socio-demographic, the knowledge, the attitude, and as well as practices related to biodiversity. The communication preferences were also discussed. And another factor that was discussed is on the analysis of different policies. For example, the National Integrated Protected Area System Act of 1992 or RA 7586, and also analysis of other local and international organizations such as World Wildlife Fund. If you look at the diagram, that's the analysis of the protected areas across Philippines. You can see there the protected area as well as the IP manage. So there is some changes as well as uh, different mechanisms or approaches depending on the area. And the goal is to have a unified approach and messaging. The second step is the design strategy. So here we actually segment the audience or stakeholder, and the process is based on KAIPA analysis. So it stands for knowledge, approval, intention, practice, and advocacy. So the stakeholders have been segmented based on the design strategy, such as the primary audience, which include the Department of Environment and Natural Resources officials. And among the secondary targets would include the local government units, indigenous people, media, non-government organization, and private groups. The third step is the create and test. So based on the gaps and specific objectives, it will be tested. So for example, 80% of the DNR employees can explain, provide funding, as well as mobilize the activities and strategies at a national and local levels. Similarly, there is the development of materials, for example, the brand positioning as well as the message, including the channel. So the preference of the group based on their assessment is more on interpersonal or face to face. But of course, social media, TV, and other communication channels will also be utilized depending on the segment. The fourth process step is mobilize and monitor. This is where already dissemination as well as the actual conduct of capacity building. So, for instance, there is the discussion of basic concepts and importance as well as management for both primary and secondary stakeholder, which will be tackled in Biodiversity 101. On the other hand, there will be also specific mobilization in terms of communication related to conservation and best practices for LGU specifically in Biodiversity 201. Another piece here is the proposal of a management setup. So the mobilization of this setup, as you can see in the figure, was also monitored. And the last step is the evaluation and the so-called evolve. So the evaluation is analyzed based on the ABC elements. So A as audience target, B for behavioral change that is aimed or desired, C conditions of the change of behavior to occur, and D is the degree of change expected. So for example, the target critical mass is more than 50% of the stakeholder. Now we look at the P process as it relates to the different and other models. So in the framework, we have the advocacy model, the steps, and objectives and outcomes. So in P process, you have the 5 steps, which I've discussed already, and also it is a tool used for planning as well as in changing behavior. The combi model also involves 5 steps, such as defining the behavior, market analysis, refining and designing strategy, and preparing the detailed action plan and budget, including monitoring and evaluation of the interventions. The objective for this model is also to change behavior and address relevant issues, and this has been widely used also in the health sector. C or communication model has 6 steps, so includes the describing the problem and its context, choosing the long-term goals, identifying the key risks and protective factors, selecting or developing interventions, planning the evaluation, as well as implementing evaluation and improvement. And the objectives and outcome for the C model is to encourage positive and quantifiable behavioral change from various communication approaches. And the last one is the cube model. So it involves 6 steps. First is the situation response and situation analysis, followed by creating a conducive environment, participatory formulation of the plan, agreements for implementation, actual implementation, and monitoring and evaluation. And the objective and outcome would also include the change in behavior in addressing issues. So this one uses a systematic assessment categorized into a different zones within a cube. So for example, prioritizing the sites, group, resource, and communication strategies. For all these models, we can see that there are participatory and collaborative approaches common to all. There is structured framework with dynamic processes and also change behavior and create social change. So now the discussion point is can we determine an appropriate model for our advocacy work? And based on that advocacy work, what are the current behavior and desired change in behavior that we want to achieve? These are the references of the presentation. With that, thank you very much.